Good almost afternoon, everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes once it seems like people have had a chance to log in and get situated. Thanks.
How you doing, Mr. Davies? I'm sorry, you're on mute. Couldn't hear you. That might be me. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was on. I thought I was doing other stuff. So who am I talking to?
Yeah, you're talking to Jerry Powell. How are
Hey,
you?
Jerry.
Hey, man.
How you been?
Doing well. Doing
That's
well.
good.
How about you?
Doing all right. Doing all
Good.
right. No, I don't know if I'm sticking around for this whole thing. I got so much going on today, but I'm going to listen to what I can listen to.
Could be some good stuff.
Yep. All right. I'm going to put it on mute again.
All
Good to
right,
hear
sounds
from
good, Dave. Yeah.
All right, we'll give it a few more moments again as people continue logging on. And if you're outside of the state of Maryland system, we've got to manually admit you. So once that kind of dies down, we'll get things going. Otherwise, you'll just hear a lot of dinging in the background as it alerts us people are joining. Now that I've said that, things have stopped. People have joined. So welcome to our quarterly office hours for the Maryland Dam Safety Program. My name is John Roach. I'm the chief of the Dam Safety Permitting Division. Charlie Wallace is also here, Inspections and Compliance Division. So we'll both be able to help hopefully answer some of your questions as this meeting goes on. Just a little housekeeping as we start. This is, I think, the third, maybe the fourth time we've done one of these. Every time a little different, but you've heard that there's some good value in them. And in fact, I'll even say that the rumor is our colleagues in the Stormwater MS4 Program Review Division, led by Stu Comstock, might be beginning to hold these in the near future too. So if you have stormwater MS4 related questions, that opportunity might be coming up. Again, you might have seen when you join, this meeting is being recorded. So we'll post video online after the fact. So if you have to duck out, or if you get interrupted, or you want to share with a friend, that will be available. The objectives for these meetings is really to keep everybody up to date with a lot of the changes that are occurring both in small ponds and dams, and what changes are occurring and when is also evolving. So we want to promote consistency. We want to get some feedback on things and see how things are going, and again, we'll provide insight into any changes and coming advancements. So for those who haven't joined before, this is a kind of an open format discussion. We are going to try to answer questions as they come up, and the meeting can be as short as a couple minutes here if nobody wants to ask anything, or we could go the full 2 hours. And it's varied in the past. To kind of keep some semblance of order, if you want to use the raise hand option, if you want to speak, then that would be helpful, so we can kind of keep track of things and people won't be speaking over each other. You can also use the chat box to type in a question, and I do have an email actually that came in 15 minutes or so ago with some good questions as well, so I can kind of kick off the conversation with answering hopefully some of those. Please, to the extent possible, we want to keep this kind of a big picture 25,000-foot conversation. So if you have a very specific project about a very specific, very specific question about a very specific project or element of a project, that might be something we try to take offline and have a one-on-one conversation with. But do feel free to share openly your ideas and your questions. And if we can't come to an agreement, I think we've said before, we can all disagree without being disagreeable. But that hasn't happened yet, I don't think, in these meetings. So that's good. I just have a few very brief kind of heads up announcements, and then I want to turn it over to Charlie, actually. The last time we spoke, there were some peer-reviewed policies that were about to hit our website, and those are the 5 that are in black there. They're still about to hit the website. Full transparency, well, we're having some IT issues. So we've set them up to be posted. We just need somebody in IT to hit the trigger to make them go live. We've had a group of stakeholders who have given us feedback on these, and these ones in general are clarifying policies, again, about typical small pond issues. There are 2 in red that we're about to start sending out to some of our stakeholders who have engaged with us in the past to review these. The first one is about small pond exemptions, and the second is about the use of filter diaphragms versus anti-seep collars. And I'll hopefully head off some questions here about the upcoming changes to MD 378 and explain why these 2 policies are coming out there. So many of you have heard, either directly through NRCS or us, or through the grapevine, that NRCS is working on an update to Pond Code 378. We have been engaged with them in that review process. That being said, the state of Maryland regulations still currently reference specifically the January 2000 version of MD 378. So when NRCS issues their new document, it won't really have any effect. So we should all continue to review against the 2000 document and the MDE policies that are posted on our webpage. But that doesn't mean we want to keep that 2000 document forever. And what we do, whether it becomes a set of MDE design standards or we revise COMAR to incorporate a new MD 378 by reference, is to be determined. But that being said, in many ways, the newer 378 and the existing 378 don't have many contradictions. So if you happened to pick up the new 378 when it's released, it will be a different document. It has, in many ways, less information in it than more, but there shouldn't be many conflicts. Two of the lesser information pieces that are going to be in the new 378 is the area that talks about which ponds are exempt from needing small pond approval. Because that's not part of the national 378 standard, and that's really specific to Maryland and how we've always done things, NRCS elected not to include those exemption criteria in 378. And that kind of makes sense. It's, again, not an NRCS criteria, it's a Maryland criteria. So to that end, we will be putting out a policy memo that clarifies which small ponds are exempt from needing small pond approval. That's, your traditional excavated ponds, your embankments that are less than 4 feet, or those that are less than 6 feet and 40,000 cubic feet. Will it be duplicative of MD 378 version 2000? Yes, but we're putting it out there to avoid any gaps or questions. We're also taking this as an opportunity. When the 2000 version of MD 378 was written, the stormwater management world was different. And what we're seeing a lot of nowadays are ponds with infiltration, bioretention media in the pond. And depending on how you calculate things, that can make it very difficult for one of these very small facilities to meet that 4-foot embankment criteria. So we're going to be acknowledging that and trying to add an additional level of exemption criteria that accounts for current trends in stormwater management practices. I think that should be an overall benefit for people. The new NRCS MD 378 also has revised filter diaphragm and anti-seep criteria consistent with national best practices. We think that this is very good criteria, and we have more or less copied and pasted it into a proposed policy that will supersede the MD 378 version 2000. It will drive us more towards filter diaphragms, but it will allow anti-seep collars when it is appropriate to use them. For many folks nationally, anti-seep collars have gone out of practice and been replaced by filter diaphragms for over 40 years now. So when I speak to some colleagues across the country, they look at us funny when we hear people still talking about anti-seep collars. The fact is that the filter diaphragms do seem to work better, avoid some construction issues, and have a long-standing history of good performance. So we'll be pushing more towards that, but we're not closing the door completely on the anti-seep collars. The other piece of information I wanted to send out there to folks is an updated listing of which districts are currently reviewing and approving small ponds. Since we last met, Montgomery County has, I believe, and if they're on here, they can chime in. I believe Montgomery County has started approving small ponds. I know they have hired some staff, and there's always some startup time required, but I believe they're now doing it. And likewise, I think Cecil County, which is perhaps a couple months behind Montgomery County. I know that they have hired staff, but I don't yet believe they are performing reviews. They're still getting their feet under them. That's my understanding. If any folks from either of those counties are online, please feel free to chime in and confirm or correct me. I'll pause for a second to see if anybody's here for those.
Yeah, John, this is Jerry Powell from Cecil County Soil Conservation District, and you are correct. We're a little bit behind. We're using July 1st as a kickoff date for maybe starting to review ponds.
Thanks, Jerry, and that's great news. You know, when all the changes that happened with NRCS policies came about, it was not our goal to send all small pond reviews to MDE. That wasn't our objective. But we did need to kind of take over some oversight, I guess is maybe not the best word, but something like oversight to fill the void that NRCS to some degree left when they stepped back from their technical assistance. So hence a lot of these policies and things like that. But we're very happy to hear that additional counties are getting geared up to start doing small pond reviews, and we'll be happy to direct applicants to the districts in those jurisdictions instead of having them have to go through the MDE process. So with that said, we finally got some rain today. It's the summer solstice, first day of summer, right? And after a long, hot, dry stretch of a few weeks, we're starting to see some rain in the forecast and some activity in the Atlantic. So I want to turn it over to my colleague, Charlie, and just have him give, well, whatever he'd like to say about that in terms of preparation.
Hey, John, thanks. I'm the other half of the dam safety divisions, the inspection and compliance side. We do more than just permits, although permits are certainly a large part of what we do in sharing technical advice and direction. On the other end of things, our world is mainly split into, we have what we call inventory dams and then the non-inventory dams, which are the small ponds that I imagine most in this audience deal with. But if you do have a dam that's on our inventory and they're either high, significant, or sometimes low hazard dams, then in the high and significant cases, everybody's supposed to have prepared an emergency action plan and submitted it for its update by May 1st of this year. And the reason for having May 1st is because of, as of June 1st, we're now in the hurricane season. And as John has on this image here, we got two depressions that are actively occurring in the Atlantic. And so both dam safety divisions participate, especially when there's an emergency going on or the potential for an emergency like a hurricane approaching. So sometimes John's group has to drop what they're doing as far as permit reviews go and help us out in handling an emergency. And just to kind of give you an idea of what our workload is like, in addition to all the permitting and technical type of information that John supplies, we actively go out and inspect dams that are on the inventory. And again, for the next few months, we pay a lot of attention to the environment out there because it's the hurricane season, and we try to have these emergency action plans up to date. And once every 5 years, the owner of a higher significant dam is supposed to have a tabletop exercise where we practice these practice using the EAP. It's not just a document that's supposed to sit on the shelf, but we need to be able to use it. So that's basically the little bit of comments I had. I don't know if it's going to apply to this group or not, but I intend to regularly participate in these. And certainly if anybody has inspection type questions or questions on inventory dams, between John and myself, we'll try to answer them. And at this point, John's been moderating, so I'm going to hand it back over to John.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, it's important. You know, preparedness and awareness are both key things for everybody in our community here of dams and small ponds. Even if you're not high hazard, we don't want anything to fail. So keep an eye towards that hurricane forecast. And there's also, if you're not signed up, this is something you can find pretty quickly online email about the Middle Atlantic River Forecast Center, MARFAC, from National Weather Service issues alerts when there are expected to be what they call significant precipitation events, which, as you can see in this mapping here, could mean maybe an inch or so, but all the way up to the spectrum of really a lot of rain. So it's a good resource just for awareness and preparedness that we want to point out. All right. Oh, sorry. Get this screen moving. So now that we've got that stuff covered, we get a chance to move into our open question and discussion period of the meeting. Like I said, this can be brief, and then we could spend an hour and a half talking. So it's kind of up to folks here if they have any questions. Jerry from Cecil SCD did email me some questions, and I'm not going to throw them up on the screen if folks don't mind, but I'll kind of give you a draft idea of what they mean, what they are, and provide some answers to them to the best I can. And then, Jerry, if you have any more detailed follow-up, we can certainly either go into that here or offline as well. So the first question that Jerry sent deals with review and approval of small ponds in Use 3 watersheds. And that has been a topic that has been in flux for the past, I would say, 3 years. I think it was right about this time in 2020, if I remember correctly, where we removed the regulation requirement that said any pond in a Use 3 watershed has to get approval from MDE Dam Safety. Shortly before, and kind of what triggered us to make that regulatory change, we had existed in a world where previously Dam Safety had issued a policy that gave some conditions when the districts could approve a pond in Use 3 watersheds. Somebody asked some questions. It got to our attorneys at MDE, and they gave us a gentle slap on the wrist and said, what's in regulation is in regulation. You can't have a policy contrary to that. So you need to change your policy or change your regulations. So we kind of did both. So the COMAR requirement for ponds in Use 3 waters coming to MDE Dam Safety is no longer existing. That being said, there are water quality regulations outside of the dam safety and stormwater world that pertain to acceptable thermal loading and temperature requirements for different use classes in the state. So this is really a resource protection issue. And if you speak to some of our folks at Maryland DNR, they're very passionate about this. The amount of cold water, what they call cold water resource areas, is dwindling in the state as development occurs. And they view ponds as one of the main bad actors in heating up our rivers and streams, which then therefore kills the cold water obligate species. So we spoke with them a lot, we tried to find a solution that works both to not burden the small pond and dam safety community excessively, but also looks to protect those resources. So the answer nowadays is when a pond comes in, you should investigate if it is in what's called a cold water resource area. And Maryland DNR, their fisheries, has a web map, and maybe one of our staff can help put a link to that in the chat if they would be so kind. They have a web map that maps cold water resource areas. Now what this means is that it's pretty much all Use 3, but there are some areas where Use 1 and Use 4 waters also support these, threatened aquatic species, primarily brook trout, but there's other things as well, where it's particularly important to protect those resources. So if you have a pond in a cold water resource area, we have a thermal guidance document on our webpage in the small pond section. And what we have said is if you meet the criteria that's laid out in that thermal design document, and you're in a cold water resource area, then yes, the district can review and approve. If you fail to meet those criteria, then it does need to come to MDE, and we will need to consult with DNR and the engineering team to see what, if any, additional protective measures can be done to protect the resource. So that guidance is on our website, and it's a lot of the stuff that people are probably familiar with. So, it's avoiding wet pools in these cold water resource areas, because those wet pools will heat up in the summer and discharge hot water. It's avoiding extended detention times, and it's things that are maybe less structural practices, like maximizing shading to the extent possible, or minimizing loss of trees for your project. And then there's some ideas about bypassing, right? So if you've got a spring flow that you can bypass around the pond, that's a benefit too. So that stuff is all there for review. And excellent. Looks like a few folks have passed information along on the chat box, so that's great. And I'll ask Bill Ashby, if he doesn't mind, if he could also set the link to the thermal design guidance in the chat as well. That's under the small pond approval section on our website as well. That would be great. I think that hopefully answers the first set of questions. The second set of question is about the NRCS Pond Code 378 updates, and I think I've covered that again. Until COMAR changes from January 2000, that is what will apply. I think I answered the other question about sand filter diaphragms and anti-seep collars. There's also a cutoff trench question. I think that's answered in one of our newer policy memos that's coming out. But if not, Jerry, please get back to me. There is a lot of discussion about flow charts and who the appropriate approval agency is, and things like that, based on pond category. That's really something that our colleague in the plan review group, Amanda Malcolm, who does state and federal approvals, has been championing that. And admittedly, it has been something that's been in a little bit in flux, and there's been a lot of drafts out there. I think we're pretty much at the point where she's probably ready to release a final, at least final for the time being. You can refer to that, and we'll try to pass that around, disseminate that as well. I'll pause for a second because I see Matt from Montgomery County OEM has his hand raised, so I'm happy to open the floor to him.
Hey, John.
Matt?
How's it going? I really appreciate these office hours. From an emergency management side of things, it's very helpful. I have a question about the GIS data for inundation areas.
Yes.
We, as you know, we had Lake Needwood in 2008 or 2006, but we've had some other issues since then with Burnt Mills and Wheaton, and we've realized that the GIS data in the plan showing the evacuation area is great, but with just about every jurisdiction having a mass notification system, it's hard to transcribe that data and upload those shape files proactively. So when we need them at 10 o'clock at night, instead of scrambling to get them imported, we can just have them there. Is there any regulation that where we can leverage as a county that says you're like a high hazard dam, you have to provide this to us? You're a significant hazard dam, you have to provide this to us? Because we've gone to a couple owner operators before and we've like, do you have this? And they say, well, I don't know. And we asked to speak to their engineers and they say, well, why do you want it?
Yep.
And I know that, like, I really wish that if there's any leverage we could put on, at least for the high hazard dams, to say, if you are a high hazard dam owner, you must provide in WGS 1984 projection this to the local emergency management office, because scrambling to get that from the consultant who's in North Carolina on vacation on 4th of July weekend, and you're, what you think may be an hour away from failure is not going to help you out.
Absolutely.
I understand that's kind of an abstract rambling from a simple emergency manager, but the amount of anxiety that causes is significant.
It's
Can I-
not abstract at all. Sorry, did somebody? Oh, Charlie.
Yeah,
you
I was gonna speak up a little bit on that. In 2020 or 2021, the law of the General Assembly modified the law 5-509.
Wait, can I have that again, please?
And it was either 2020 or 2021. The main law that dam safety goes by, there's a section called 5-509 that really gives us a lot of authority. Anyway, the law has required us to take a more active role in emergency action plans and pushing owners of dams to do what we want to be prepared for an emergency. We've just recently became aware, and we've reviewed this again, that there's some changes we need to take on our stance with emergency action plans. So that's something I would imagine over the next year that we'll be working on, and certainly what you're asking for to get the required dam owners to provide the shape files, and that are something that we can possibly work into this and push for. But as of today, we don't have it, but that's something we're working on.
Okay. I may email Charlie and John. I may email you on the side, because I'm also the office GIS person and the mass notification person and the dam person. So they all kind of like a nice little triangle here. But we have found that we understand PMF, problem maximum flood, floodplains, and all that. And while we found that the analysis is accurate to where the floodwaters go, the address points on how people register into a mass notification system, you may have it where the floodwater comes up to the house, like right up to the front porch, and 3 feet away is where the point that the master, if you were to, use that polygon, that address would be missed because it doesn't intersect with the dot. So the way we've done it is we've looked at what the parcel boundary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, like, we try to do that work when on a blue sky day, where we may add 5 or 10 homes onto a warning box just to get these people out of there, so they're not freaking out why everybody to my left and my right's gone, but I haven't gotten anything. I really would appreciate a copy of that regulation, because we've met some resistance from just 1 or 2 dam owners. Like, well, I don't want to give you this stuff. And we need to be able to say, hey, well, the law says, you got to pony this up, because it's internal. We don't sell this data. We don't use it lightly. We would never notify the public, outside of what you guys say in the emergency action plan. But we just want to be able, when you say go, we're ready to click that button and go quick.
Yeah, Matt, and I would also add, thinking not just the parcel boundaries that are, let's say, get wet, right? It's also important to think about properties that might become isolated. Right?
That's our primary concern with the fire service. Right? Yes.
But to that end, I don't know that 5509 will fully give you the ammunition. It might help us. But I'm actually really proud about another project that we're working on right now. It's a hazard mitigation grant funded project. And we're actually running what's called DSF-WISE, which is essentially, I'll call it a simplified dam breach model. And we're running it in 2 conditions for every dam in the state. So what that will generate, it will generate what we call a sunny day failure. So blue sky day, whatever the water's in the pond, it will, it goes out. And then we're running it what we call the brim full condition. So again, because of limitations of the product, treat it as a blue sky day, but instead of the pool being wherever it normally is, it's at the top of the dam. So it's not the full range of minimum amount of flow you may get in a failure to maximum PMF flow, but it's probably a lot more realistic for most events we would see. So we're going to have that, and we're doing this in this software with a consultant, so that we have apples to apples methods, products, everything for every dam. That way you're not, you may be requesting it from a, let's say a WSSC in Montgomery County, sophisticated dam owner, lots of resources. They've got a real fancy product, right? And you might also be requesting it from mom and pop citizen who happen to own a hazard dam in the county. And, they're now just at 25 years old because somebody offered to do it for them. And they can't pony up the money to do it again. So huge range in quality, let's say, and methodology. So this project, we're well along the way. I would say we're probably 75 to 80% complete with getting every dam mapped with these 2 cases. It will give you inundation extent. It will also estimate depth of flow. And then what we call DV values, depth velocity. So that's where you really start to hone in on the hazard risks, people, because it's not, slow moving or static moving deep water and shallow swift water can have different effects. So using this depth velocity factor helps give you an idea of what the risk profile is. So when this project is complete, we will be offering the inundation mapping on an online portal, ArcGIS hosted, for all the dams. And it will certainly be available to you. And then we will also have that more detailed data about the hazard that we could easily have at our fingertips and offer at a moment's notice to you as well for more additional context. Once we've also set these models up and have them checked and all of that, let's say we had a real world situation where we needed to run some mapping right then and there to assist in an emergency. The models are already set up, so we could make those runs right then and there. In fact, we did that and assisted Carroll County when they had an incident at Cascade Lake in 2019. So I believe our grant period of performance ends in October of this year. So we have to be done by then. So by the end of this year, we will have those products available to you, and happy to share them with anybody, not only emergency management, but let's talk about county planning departments and people who have functions that you might be approving development and inundation without realizing. It will be there for all to see and use.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I really hope that I look forward to using it because, like you said, WSSC kind of dams very good. It's some of the smaller ones where, they're an HOA president. They're a president for this year. It's very difficult to, I should say it's a challenge to communicate with them and get them to understand that if there's 6 to 8 inches of rain forecast this weekend, please don't go down to Florida and leave nobody else in contact. Well, you can go check it if you want to, kind of thing. Like, I don't think you understand. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. And I will say one last thing before I promise I'll shut up after this. These office hours are awesome. I hope that there's maybe a quarterly office hour that you could send out as a recurring calendar invite so people get them on their, keep them on, save that time because time is precious these days of Zoom calls and everything. This is excellent. I really, really, really appreciate you guys and your office setting this up.
Well, thanks. And I apologize because we did I think we had to save the date a while back on this one, but I didn't really send out the invite and details until I think maybe Monday night or something or yesterday morning. So that's on me. We will do better in getting these dates set further in the future and as we move forward. But we will, we do intend to have them at least a quarterly basis until people say that they're not valuable anymore. Hopefully that doesn't happen. So hopefully the value is there. And I see Martin's got his hand raised, so turn the floor over to Martin.
Yeah. Hey, John, this is great, but I need you to do me a favor. Can you does somebody have control of all the microphones and the video?
With this platform, we don't have, I
Right,
can't
can
like
you
automatically mute
tell
or turn people off.
Great.
But
Can you tell everybody that once they're talking, don't leave their microphone on? The guy from Montgomery County left his microphone on the whole time that you were talking. I didn't. I'm old. My hearing's not very good. If there was anything important you said in the last 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to ask you to repeat it. Because when there's a second person's microphone on, I'm only hearing every second or third word of yours. So when a person's ask a question, they need to turn their microphone off and their camera off while you respond to the question. So please think back to whatever you just told that guy that was important and repeat it. Okay. I'm going to turn my microphone and camera off. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, for that kind of public service announcement to everybody. The important stuff that we just mentioned with Matt is Environment Article 5-509, which might give us some more oomph to compel owners to share inundation mapping with other people. And also we have a mapping project where we will be doing apples to apples, same methodology, sunny day and brimful failure mapping for every dam in the state as a resource for emergency management planners and other folks. This isn't a substitute for doing a full-blown HEC-RAS modeling, but this is promoting consistency, same type of product around the state so that people who need it for decision making can have it. So that's my very brief recap. But we will also have a recording of this session, which will capture the noise that bothered you. Also, a transcript of this session, which isn't perfect, but it will hopefully capture a lot of what I've been saying, or anybody's been saying. A last note for anybody else who's suffering from having a hard time hearing or whatnot. There is a closed caption function in the bottom, should be in the bottom of your window, that you can turn on, and it will provide closed captioning transcription to you to help you out. So
right now it's good. As long as there's only one person. That's the same problem I have now. I've gotten old, and it's not the guy from Montgomery County's fault. It's just I've gotten old, and if there's more than one person talking, I have a hard time separating the voices. So let me just get out of the way here.
No problem. I'm going to go back to Jerry's email he had sent me with a couple more probably simple answers to the email. Maybe it'll help some other folks out as well. One question was regarding our policy memo 4 about some really small ponds that we've added, kind of looped into the ponds that don't need small pond approval. The table is not perfect. It does reference, Jerry was referencing some units or some numbers that were perhaps not given units. There is a reference to acre feet there in the table in policy memo 4, but it's probably could be made more apparent. That's our fault. But the numbers that you're looking at, Jerry, are acre feet, 1 and 1.5 acre feet storage volume. All right. So that being said, I think we've covered most of those questions. And I'm happy. It looks like Daniel D has raised his hand, so I'll turn the floor over to him.
Hey, John. Couple quick questions. I'll just start with one and then let other people jump in. But you mentioned that some of the SCDs are currently reviewing and approving small ponds. Does that also include the super wide criteria? I know that in the criteria it mentions that if you meet the requirements, that approval is possible by the local SCD. And I just wanted to see how that was going. If there are any exceptions to the rule that, super wides aren't going to the SCD, and just any information there.
Yeah, happy to respond to that. So as we move forward with all the NRCS changes, we've released a document called our Small Pond Approval Guidelines, which we are looking for all the districts. We expect all the districts to be following that framework. And in that framework we discussed, and actually in the regulations, it says that the small ponds should be approved in accordance with MD 378 and the department's policies and procedures. So that, and the department's policies and procedures, which is referenced in COMAR, is an important factor. So we, again, expect that the policies that we've posted on the webpage also apply, regardless of who the review entity is. So the question about super wide roadway embankments, yes, we would, that policy memo can and should be applied in the appropriate cases if it's a small pond review by a district or by our internal state and federal review team, or the State Highway Administration, which has been designated as a small pond reviewer. I will kind of put a caveat to that statement, though. The districts and the other review entities are not obligated at any time to review a small pond. They can always ask that MDE perform the review and approval. And I think it's realistic to say that if there are policies out there that folks are not familiar with, or they only see once in a very long time and they're unsure how to apply them, they may prefer to to not perform the review and send it to us. And that's perfectly legal and acceptable. If you are a representative of one of those districts and you're asked to look at a policy memo, one of ours, or apply it to a design review, and you haven't done that before, I'll also say that you are welcome to pick up the phone or send an email, and we will happily provide any additional context or kind of what's the story behind this type information, so you can feel comfortable using those policy memos. Hopefully that answers the question. Yes, other Dan.
I just gave a second just in case anyone else wanted to ask a question, but that did answer the question. Next question, is there any place where I can find a good definition of the limits of where construction being performed near or on an embankment would require the dam safety permit? How far away do you need to be where you don't need a dam safety permit? I mean, is there any guidance there?
So I think if you are on the embankment itself, I would think that's kind of a clear shot answer of you would need either a small pond approval or a dam safety permit. Unless the activities that you're performing falls under our policy memo 11, which discusses what we would consider as routine maintenance, things that everybody should be able to do to keep their facility in normal condition without requiring an approval. But beyond that, if you've got construction near your dam embankment, it's a very good question of when you should consider small pond approval or dam permitting. And as some famous people have said, it depends. So we somewhat, and the reason I say it depends is it depends on the nature of construction. So let's say you are doing some deep excavations. Deep excavations near an embankment certainly could destabilize that embankment and cause issues. We have somewhat of a guidance on that in our policy that discusses utilities and utility work around embankments, because that's where we would really expect to see like an excavation fairly close to an embankment that could be destabilizing. So look to that policy memorandum. I do not recall off the top of my head the number of it, but that discusses in the context of utility work, how close you should or should not be before you need a permit. Otherwise, if it's kind of superficial work, 3 feet or less, let's say below ground or above ground work, I would probably say you're safe to say, kind of use the 15-foot woody vegetation buffer as a good rule of thumb. If you're outside of that woody vegetation buffer, and your work is, generally above ground, then you probably wouldn't need permitting. And I'll always caveat that. If you're doing some work that could potentially change the hazard classification of a pond, then that's something we need to discuss probably. So yeah, you can, if you start building a new townhome complex 16 feet from the toe of a dam, that's currently a low hazard structure, it may not be low hazard anymore. And does that require a permit? No. But does that, get the pond owner, which you may not be, into a situation where they would need to potentially upgrade their structure because of a changed hazard classification? Then that's something that is bigger and definitely needs more involvement and may not need permitting, but whatever effects to that property owner is, the dam owner, that will probably require changes to the dam, which would require permitting. So it's a whole system that we kind of have to take that perspective of. Yes.
Just a continuation of that. So in policy memorandum number 11, item 6, it talks about replacing up to 10 square yards of missing and storm drain scour riprap on dams and along the embankment. But let's say for SHA, we have outfall restoration projects and we're taking a scour hole downstream of the outfall and we want to put in a plunge pool.
Mhm.
Is this something that would require a dam safety permit, that after reviewing the culvert, it becomes a super wide embankment or a small pond or even a dam?
If State Highway gets into a case where you realize something should be classified as a dam that's not currently classified as a dam, I think I think that probably needs kind of a more individualized, conversation with us to determine the right paths forward. I could just see so many different, what if type scenarios where it's hard to lock down a specific question or a specific answer, excuse me. And in part of that, to go to your specific example about, let's say, taking a riprap apron maybe and making it into more of an engineered plunge pool. That is, in my mind, different than what we were thinking about, because you're changing the structure, right? We're basically talking about restoring something to original design with that riprap comment there. So if we're changing the design as opposed to just restoring it to what was originally constructed, then that probably would get into the realm of needing some kind of approvals, but probably also warrants a conversation before we go down that path to make sure we're all on the same page about that specific case and structure. I think I had heard, and I forget now, I apologize for that, if it was some folks from Hartford SCD had asked yesterday if we could talk about spillway replacement rehabilitation options. I'm not sure if they had specific thoughts in mind that they wanted to discuss with the group and get, I will say one of the nice things about this meeting is it doesn't just have to be us from MDE answering the questions. So we'll take a stab at it, of course, but if you and your professional experience have also dealt with similar cases and you want to chime in and provide some insight, we had some wonderful conversations last time we did this of that nature, and it was great to see that collaboration. So I'm not sure if those folks who emailed me about that question would like to chime in on, elaborate more on what their questions were or concerns were.
Hey, John, Bob Anderson. That was me who emailed you yesterday about that. I'm actually Harford County Stormwater Management. We're having to do a lot of repair replacements of principal spillway pipes because a lot of the ones that are 20, 30 years old now are all CMPs, and the inverts have all rusted out and gotten undermined. So I'm just wondering, do those have to be replaced always, or can they be lined, or doing some kind of invert paving, or what is the preferred options for using those, replacing the CMP pipes?
Yeah, happily. I'll put some thoughts in there, and then again, if anybody else has experience with this in your jurisdiction, I'd welcome your thoughts too. So when it comes to invert paving, I think we'd probably be against that notion. I know it's used in a lot of roadway culverts, but ensuring water tightness, especially in something that has a permanent pool, and permanent capability of seepage and internal erosion is an important concern. And I don't know that invert paving all the way gets there. So then we're looking then into probably either the replace or repair that spillway barrel. Our opinion that we've kind of followed for a while is if you catch it before it gets really bad, so that CMP, it might have some small holes or some small deterioration areas, but you don't have big voids underneath it. If you can even get in there and kind of sound it with like a hammer or something, and it still sounds all solid around it, then lining is certainly an option. And then you have to evaluate the hydraulics of the situation, right? So if you want to line it with, let's say, like a snap plate liner, which is a thicker HDPE, and you fill the annular space around that snap tight pipe and the hose pipe with a grout, you're losing, a minimum probably of 5 to 6 inches of diameter of the pipe when you're doing that. And that can really affect the performance of the pipe. So it may not even work, even though you're probably getting a better end value coefficient, so a smoother pipe. The loss of area is probably could be too much. So we've also seen a lot of cured in place pipe being used these days. So that's, for folks who aren't aware, it's kind of like a resin impregnated fiberglass sock that gets inserted into the barrel and then more or less inflated, so it's got a good contact with the pipe, and then it's cured. There's a host of different ways to cure it so that resin sets up firm. We've heard that if you've got a BCCMP, so a bituminous coated corrugated metal pipe, that the heat curing of those heat curing options is not usually very viable. There's too much of a chance for delamination and not good contact, because then you're heating up that bitumen or what might remain of it, and that can cause some issues. But if you got a straight, just regular corrugated metal pipe, then you've got a couple different options there. And that because that's really thin, it does help you get a smoother pipe and a better end value, and you lose a lot less cross-sectional area. So that's good. But again, it all kind of depends on if you've really lost the whole invert and you're seeing a lot of voids and stuff like that. We don't know how big those voids are and how extensive they are. So we'd probably push for a full replacement there to take away those uncertainties. And Martin, you've done a lot of this, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Did you say me? Okay. I think it was me. I hope that was me you were talking to.
Yes, it is. Yes, you raised your hand.
Okay. Yeah, we have done a bunch of these as retrofits. And I did a little study early on to what size pipe, because even though that's really thin, and we use the UV cured. All right, that's what we use. That works really well. Super pleased with that product. Even though it's really thin on a really small pipe, it still becomes a appreciable percentage of the cross-sectional area. So we drew a line and said above this size pipe with the UV cured, it's totally insignificant. It's only, 2% cross-sectional area. We're going to assume it's all good. Below this size pipe, you got to run the analysis. You got to go in, calculate it, and figure out what happens, right? Because you can figure that out and say, okay, this is fine. But below a certain size, you get a 12-inch pipe, even though it's only this thick, it still makes a difference on the diameter on the performance of the pipe. So just a suggestion, if you wanted to do add something to one of your mini technical memos you're putting out, you could have one on pipe lining and at what sizes you need to start go through the analysis again, and for the different thicknesses of liner, and today when you guys have nothing to do. And okay, all right. Let's see here.
Got a lot of folks who sit around doing nothing all day, right? So we can find something. No, just kidding. No, that's a really good point, Martin. It's also, when you think about the thicknesses of either of these, I think the conventional wisdom out there is to ensure that the liner has sufficient structural strength to carry the weight of soil above it. So it may be a little conservative, but I think the guidance out there for slip lining would say that, particularly for a CMP pipe, that you should assume the host pipe has lost its strength because it is so deteriorated. So that therefore then dictates the thickness of any of the linings to make sure that lining can hold up, because particularly for CIPP or slip lining, you can expect a very long life for those, but the metal that's already 30 years old might be 80 years old next time you have to think about it, and it will certainly be more deteriorated. Another note I'd put in there is that our guidance has really suggested for a long time that we should retrofit a filter diaphragm if one does not exist when you slip line. And that's really a factor of, again, addressing those unknown voids in the embankment, if any. If you're now sealing up a pipe that was leaking previously, you might be putting water causing water to flow where it wasn't previously flowing, and we want to capture that and have it filtered so it doesn't create or perpetuate an internal erosion issue. But retrofitting filter diaphragms, I think you'll never find a contractor who says, "Oh, that's easy, I can do that." They're always going to complain about it. That's okay. What we would say is that kind of in a retrofit case, we have done this a number of times, and so far seems good, is we have discussed enlarging or creating a new concrete end wall to that spillway pipe. And then basically using that end wall, the backfill of the end wall, as your filter media. So, you may not meet all the size dimension criterias for filter diaphragms out there, but it's something. And we think that's a good practice. This is before my time here at MDE Dam Safety, but I know when we first started approving slip lining projects, they did not have filter diaphragms. We have seen some cases where there is concerning seepage that comes out around the pipe and is not in the pipe on those projects, and that's where that kind of thought comes from. I'm also kind of looking at the chat here, monitoring, and I'm seeing Keith Moore is getting issues to access some documents on our website. The documents you're looking for are actually some of the things that we're trying to move around a little bit with IT to update and refresh our website. So I wonder if things are happening in the background with IT getting those things moved, and that's why you might be seeing those access issues. But Bill put his email in the chat, and we can certainly email any documents if we're having website issues. Shoot any of us in the whole dam safety program a message, and we can get you what you need. All right, I've got another raised hand, so turn the floor over to you.
That might be me, Charles Wallace, RK&K. Good afternoon, John. Good afternoon, John. Thank you for the heads up about facilities with filter media and looking at applicable 378 criteria. If you can share, is there any thought, if you have a facility that's using a concrete weir as the outfall structure, the height of embankment, might it be able to be measured to the crest of the weir rather than the top of the berm? Thank you.
That's a good question, and I will say at this point now, we have not considered that. This policy is still, getting ready to be passed around for some comment. And so, that's something we can kind of feed to the folks who see it, and see if they have any thoughts or insights they want to add. That's a good thought. Just for folks' reference, when we do these policy memorandums, it's a balancing point, right? We want to pass it around to outside partners who see different things than us and have lots of experience, and we want to rely on them. Admittedly, if we send it out to every single person on our email list, or 1,500 people, that's probably too much to manage. So if anybody's ever wondering who those folks are, and my memory is not perfect, so I'm not even going to name names, but what I'll say is it's a mix of internal to MDE folks. Districts are represented, a number of soil conservation districts and some stormwater review agencies, NRCS, State Highway Administration, some representatives from ACEC, representing the private sector, and yeah, that's probably about it. So it's a healthy list of over probably a dozen people from diverse positions who we send stuff out to get their feedback, and then try to get policies that make sense, that are good for everybody, hopefully that make things easier for everybody and are easy to use. And that being said, if we put these policies out there and they don't work, or there's a flaw, or there's a question about how to apply it, or maybe something needs to be added, these things should not be set in stone, right? We can never consider and contemplate every single possible situation out there. So, if there's good suggestions or a need for revising a policy memorandum, we are very much willing to do that. So, yeah, just putting that out there just to kind of demystify, hopefully, the process, if anybody's wondering how we've been doing that. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions out there?
Hey, John, Bob Anderson again. Quick question. Hopefully, if you have an existing pond where you're doing a repair and it has a pool, a permanent pool that's supposed to be in it, do you have, when you do the repairs and you have to go through the 378 review again, should you be accounting for any kind of thermal impacts?
If you're in one of those cold water resource areas and you're doing, if you're in one of the cold water resource areas, yes, we should consider the thermal impacts, because there's always opportunities, or there may be opportunities for improving the situation, right? It may be a wet pond, let's say in a use 3, which is traditionally a no-no, but people need water sometimes, right? So particularly like ag situations. So we can't just say no wet pools, period. But there may be ways to mitigate. So maybe it's a bottom release type structure, or a diversion or partial diversion, or things like that. So yes, I would say regardless of new construction or existing construction that's being repaired or retrofitted, if the project is something that would need small pond or dam safety approvals, Still, I would look through that thermal guidance, and it may need to be kicked to MDE accordingly. And I'll say one very brief thing before Charlie chimes in is that the reason the reason we're kicking things to MDE to finish off the process is because DNR wants to weigh in and get comments. And oftentimes, you might be picking battles, right? You might be saying, how do we, we can't both meet stormwater regulations and the thermal design guidance, and maybe even a third thing. We can't satisfy every single requirement. So where does there have to be some reasonable give and take? And we felt that, I think for everybody's sake, we can make those decisions, and you don't have to worry about making them on your own, kind of, and weighing the pros and cons. So that's why we're saying things to come to us. It's not like there's anything special other than that kind of situation. And I will say, it's fairly regular that you're pitting stormwater regulations versus the thermal issues, and somebody has to give. So there's some insight there. And Charlie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, the other thing is in the past, DNR kind of gave us a guidance if it's an existing wet pond, and all they're doing is in-kind replacement. They're putting back exactly what they have. Maybe the corrugated metal pipe is failing or something, then they typically have not objected to it. But so, if you're backed into a corner, you can hold them to just replacing in kind. But certainly, like John was saying, it's a good opportunity to take a look if there aren't some improvements that can be made. And certainly if they're proposing any changes, you certainly got the right to then, hold them to the fire.
Yeah, and I'm going to add a little bit more about context about this thermal stuff is, it's interesting because there are regulations that specifically speak to temperature criteria. But a lot of these, best practices for trying to mitigate thermal concerns are exactly that. They're best practices. There's nothing that says if you do X, you will guaranteed, have Y temperature. So that's kind of why it is sometimes a negotiated, outcome of what we're doing is how many good things can we throw at it to mitigate the thermal concerns, to hopefully hit target temperatures that are not, threatening wildlife. But there's no guarantees there. So that's where it's kind of, it's a little bit, based on personal experience and a little bit of literature, academic literature that's out there. At the same time, some of the folks in the DNR Environmental Review Group are retiring in the very near future, and I expect that will change the nature of our review and our back and forth kind of process. And I don't know what the change will be, but what we're trying to advocate for is, both being responsible to the environment and all of that by keeping those thermal standards, but B, also not being overly burdensome to the pond design and review process either. So really trying to strike a balance, but trying to also be, mindful of not imposing too many regulations or abstract requirements on the design team and developers in those cases. So it is a balance. Hey, Martin.
I wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting in on but anybody else, but for a trivial detail, that question about the liners, I went back and pulled out the chart I created a while back. All right. And for my 24-inch pipe on up, you lose 5% or less of the capacity, as long as the pipe is relatively short, which all of our barrel pipes are, when you go to a UV liner. And as you get larger, it becomes proportionally smaller. So I kind of drew the line. I said anything below a 24, you need to go through and do a full analysis. Above a 24, you're just lining an existing pipe. Get it done before it collapses, before you have real trouble. And it's trivial. So that's just, I'm sure that you'll do a much better job than my little halfway job, but that was my answer when I did that. And yeah, that was it. I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody who was interested.
Thanks. That's a good rule of thumb, because if you're losing that little cross-sectional area, but you're also, improving your smoothness, then probably is a wash, right? Or even an improvement in terms of efficiencies. So that's great. Great to have.
All right. I'll bother you one more time. 2 feet works out great too, because 2 feet's the magic number in 378, right? For barrel pipes. Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, we're about an hour and 15 into our meeting here. We're not going to force anybody to stay until 2 o'clock, silently, looking in the screens. But it seems like our pace is slowing down a little bit, so we'll, I'm available till 2, but we'll stay here for a few more minutes and let people maybe think about some questions they might have. But if we don't have things come up, we will end the meeting, and we will send an email out and share when the recording is posted online, so you can access it. And I'll say it now, just in case I forget. Thank you to everybody who is participating in these. I think it's a really beneficial thing for all of us to hear from folks. We learn some in these, as much as hopefully we can educate. So thank you everybody for showing up.
Thanks, John.
All right, I see we're losing folks. I think we'll call this one to a close. Thanks again, everybody. If we don't see each other virtually or in person, have a great summer. And stay tuned for more announcements on our email listserv and for the next version of these office hours. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.